Hey y'all, I'm the captain, and this is Sailing on the Spectrum, where I talk about the challenges growing up with autism spectrum disorder. Welcome aboard. Today I want to talk about the idea of autism and being a late bloomer. Uh, I guess I've wondered, and I even looked it up. You can Google it, like you can Google just about anything, but are autistics usually late bloomers, or people on the spectrum late bloomers? And you'll get a good bit of answers about that from different articles or different people who comment. Uh, and I would say that if you understand what you mean by late bloomer, yeah, I'd say that a lot of people on the spectrum could be late bloomers. But here's what I mean by that. If you're a late bloomer, it just means that maybe there is some aspect of your life and some aspect of your development that is that just seems to come at a later curve than the general, what you would say the general populations is, and that's fine to say that. You don't want to give the impression that some people on the spectrum are late bloomers in the sense that they're late as in you're late to class, or you're late to the party, or you're late to something you should be on time for, so to speak. Because really, when you think about it, uh, just about every one of us is going to have, whether you're on the spectrum or not, everybody is going to have their own uh, specific line on which they end up uh, developing, you know. And I would say that it is a real a dominant a social construct, especially in Western society, maybe in the last century or so, that especially in the last like 50, 60 years, I would say, that everything is kind of measured. I mean, your school is measured, uh, the time at which you're able to start driving, of course, is measured, and there's a good reason for that. Obviously, you can't drive when you're too small, or you know, cars are kind of built for people who are kind of grown up, and you want to have the full mental capacity to be able to make good decisions with an object like a car and that kind of thing. You need to obviously be a certain age to vote. You need to be a certain age to do some certain things. But at the same time, you talk about the way that school is, and then college is. You're kind of told that, okay, you're supposed to start your school when you're about 4 or 5. When you're about 18, that's when you should be graduating. You should be in college, know where you're going to college, and then be done with college at 22 and know what you're going to do. Either go to grad school or know what you're going to do for the foreseeable future in your life, if not the rest of your life. And that seemed to be kind of the mood on the mores, that was around which a lot of our society was built, because that seemed to be kind of the general expectation of everybody to kind of move at that pace. And it's good that you move at a pace where you can get through school at a good young age and get yourself into the world and doing your thing. The problem is there are ways in which certain people may not be ready for it in that time frame, like I just mentioned, and then there are ways in which other people may be ready and need to go and get into it a little bit earlier. It's kind of like that thing, it's one of the downfalls of, I guess, a lot of educational systems, is that they want children all to get the education they need, but they all do it in a way that everybody is put in the same conveyor belt, as it were. It's a one-size-fits-all type system. And with people on the spectrum, I would say not just education, but the whole of life definitely can show its shortcomings in that respect, because people on the spectrum have so much to offer in terms of what they can do, not only for themselves, but for the world around them, but the way in which they're made to have to develop and have the mental capacity to do, not only to learn what they need to learn, but then to make the decisions they need to make in time, certainly will be very, it just will be very difficult for them to be able to do it in the time frame, or in at least even near the time frame that many of the general population is already doing it. And the general population, kind of, I guess it may be fair to say that the general population, as it were, the neurotypical population, those who don't have some autism spectrum disorder, are able to adapt and get and adjust to that, probably a little more readily on the whole than any people who are on the spectrum. It certainly was the case with me. I have another video out that is, I talked about the series on Netflix, Love on the Spectrum. In their latest season, they had one young man who, they talk about how they learned to go out to find love. That's one, thing, that, it seems like without it even being spoken, some people have a time slot around that, where you kind of, they say, well, it's good to, in your 20s to kind of find that special someone, and then want to get married and get settled. I don't know, but all I'm saying is that there was this one kid who said, I haven't dated for 33 years. And I think it's important to note this guy is 33 years old. So it's like, well, okay. Actually, as it turns out, I was almost 33. No, I was 32 when I really first started to date my first serious girlfriend, who ended up becoming my wife. And so, I mean, it's like, I guess he's not, if he's way behind, then I'm way behind too, but obviously neither of us are. But it just goes to show that's not something you can really put a number to in terms of when is the right time, or when are you really on the right track to do, make that big step in your life. But there are other big steps, like not just, it's one thing for when you're done with high school and you graduate and you walk that aisle, or but when are you ready for college? Is, if you're on the spectrum, is coming through the rigors of high school really burned you out? Are you needing to kind of, settle down, get into something simple, find your way, go through whatever periods of development you think you need to. It seems like our society isn't really made for that to happen very easily. Doesn't facilitate that very well. I would say certainly American culture is that way. I would say a lot of, as it were, so-called developed cultures, especially Western cultures, seem to be that way too. They're just geared toward people being ready to just, drop off the line in their mid-20s, go out and get their life in gear, and it's just, I know, especially on the spectrum, when you have, when you're slammed with those responsibilities all at once, it can be very overwhelming and just about impossible. I mean, I really had the first place I ever lived in on my own when I was about 25, or 26. I had actually lived with a guy just as roommates after college, but and I'd had jobs by then. I would say that on the whole, I probably was a little ahead of the curve, maybe in comparison to some others on the spectrum. I don't know. I don't really know, but I know that I never could have dreamed of being able to go out and find my own place. But I managed to find somewhere to live, at least after college, for about a year, and then I moved that bit back in with my parents. But then they moved out of town, and I was able to find my own place, and it was the perfect place. I ended up staying in until when I got married, and even after that, I was like, I don't know, I couldn't, even 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined owning a house. And here I have a house. It's almost a year I've had this house, and and I'm in my 40s now. But those are things that just can't happen when you put it in a time scale and force somebody, especially somebody who's on the spectrum, to kind of, have to work in that narrow expectation of time. And there are ways in which a lot of times I heard it, somebody put, who was talking about how his emotional development had been arrested because he grew up in a very broken home, and he knew that would present a challenge when he wanted to find his woman down the road, which he did eventually. But I just say that to say, a lot of times those areas of development which can easily be arrested because of the rigors and sometimes the trauma of coming through the normal rigors and routines of, or how do I put it, the normal pace that's been set for kids, and then to develop as they become into adulthood. When you are faced with that challenge and you're set back on such a curve, having to recover from all of that, when you got to settle down and start making your own decisions and making your own having your own responsibilities, you have a lot of catching up to do, and that just gets very overwhelming. And it's important to realize that nobody, be they on the spectrum or otherwise, should be judged as a person solely on the basis of how rapidly or how efficiently, as it were, they're able to cross these milestones, as it were, how well they get done with school, college, job, house, or married, and then kids or whatever. You just don't judge people in that sense. And there are a lot of times where I had to come to the personal resolve and realization that I didn't have to judge myself that way, and the ones who really loved and understood me weren't judging me that way either, and I didn't have to suspect that they were. And I think that is something that, if you're on the spectrum, you really gotta do whatever you can to fight tooth and nail against that myth. So I would really urge you to remember that being a late bloomer doesn't mean you're late to the game, and that you're going to be you're just going to be playing a walk-on role in the grand scheme of the world, and then nobody's going to remember who you are or care about who you are, because that's just not true. So just seeing how I've done, I'm married, I have a little girl and a wonderful wife, and we've been married over 10 years now, and I've had this house for over a year, and it's just such a wonderful thing. And I didn't do it because I worried about how people were going to judge me on how well I was doing in coming along compared to others. And so just keep that in mind. And this is the Captain, and I will see you on our next voyage. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.